My top 6 books of the last 6 months. So it is July, which means we have 6 months of 2024 behind us and 6 months to go. So I decided to look back on my reading from the past 6 months and pick out the most standout book from every single month. I thought that was the only fair way to do this. Some reading months were better than other reading months, but I just looked back and I picked out the book that I enjoyed reading most from each month. So without further delay, let's go ahead and get into this. For January, my favorite book that I read in January was hands down The Ashes and the Star-Cursed King. This is the sequel to The Serpent and the Wings of Night, book 2 in the Crowns of Nyaxia series. I think of it more as a duology because only the first 2 books follow the 2 characters that stood out to me the most. This book continues Aurea and Rain's story, picks up right where book 1 left off, so I can't really say too much about it, but they're kind of navigating their new situation and there's a new mystery that they have to solve. Aurea discovers a lot of things about herself and we get more of Rain's past and backstory. We also get more of the gods and goddesses in this world. There's more politics and world building, but it's not boring though, which I think book 2 of fantasy series can kind of fall into that heavy politics thing with when there's a war going on or there's opposing sides. It can get a little tedious, but this did not. This was very character focused, which I really enjoyed about this book. For February, my favorite book that I read in February was Once Upon a Broken Heart. I love this book and this series so much. It's just like a 5-star series overall. This book just introduced me to the world of the Magnificent North, and I love Evangeline and her story. I loved following her and Jax and all the other characters in this trilogy. So this tells the story of Evangeline, who has a broken heart because her first love is marrying her stepsister, and she basically will do anything to stop this marriage from happening. So she decides to make a deal with the Prince of Hearts, who is a Fate. The Fates are like the gods in this world, and so basically they remind me sort of like the Greek gods, stories of the Greek gods, how they would kind of help you but for a price, or they basically see the humans as entertainment. So everyone knows, don't make a deal with a Fate. She does it anyway. Chaos ensues, and we start on this magnificent journey that takes us to the Magnificent North. So this starts off in the world of Caraval, which is the series Stephanie Garber published before this series, which I enjoyed because it brought me back to a familiar setting. I kind of already knew how the magic system worked and how the world worked. Then we go to a whole new place in the world, and I loved it. It felt new but familiar at the same time. I love the whimsy of her books. I know everybody talks about it, but it's just true. It just feels like reading a Disney movie or something. And I don't know, I just really enjoyed this. It swept me away. I read all 3 books pretty much back to back and would highly recommend it. In March, my favorite book that I read in March was Thistlefoot. This was actually a gift, and I'm so glad that it was because I never would have picked it up on my own. This is sort of a Baba Yaga retelling, and it follows 2 siblings as they unearth secrets from their past and discover how the struggles of their ancestors and their family have made them who they are, and how they can use the magic that this gives them to combat sort of an age-old evil. And I loved that. I love the parallels that this drew from this world to the real world. I love the messaging in this book. I literally annotated whole pages of this at times because I just found it so fantastic and amazing. This isn't an example of a whole page I annotated, but there's so many quotes in this book that I just loved and really enjoyed reading. And overall, it was just a beautiful story that I highly recommend to anyone. It's centered around the Jewish experience, but I highly related to it as an African American woman, and the author does draw parallels from the Jewish experience to many other groups. But even if she didn't, like, this is just kind of like a universal story, I feel like. So yeah, highly recommend it. It's probably my favorite book. It is my favorite book that I've read this year. For what month are we in? April? Yeah, for April, I chose Crimson Kingdom, which is part of the Lachlan Feuds series, and I'm basically chose this one because I want to talk about the Lachlan Feuds as a whole, because I've really enjoyed reading this year. This tells the story of Rowan, who is a princess in sort of like a Scots-Irish inspired kingdom, and she ends up, through like lots of twists and turns and circumstances, being a captive of one of the dukes of a neighboring kingdom that doesn't really have a king or queen. It's just separated into like different dukedoms, and this duke has a reputation for being super ruthless and awful, and this is just kind of their story. It's like an unlikely enemies to lovers, forced proximity story, and it was just really witty and fun and fast paced. I loved how short these chapters were. That's like my main takeaway from this. The chapters are really short, and it's technically classified as a romantasy, but there's not really much fantasy going on until like this book, which is book 3, and then book 4, the final book in the series. But I really enjoyed this. I would highly recommend this to anybody who wants to like get into reading, especially if you want to get into fantasy, because it's literally so simple to understand the magic system. And yeah, I just really enjoyed reading this. It was just fun. It was just fun to read this year. In May, my book that I chose was actually a thriller, which I was never really a thriller girl. I kind of got into thriller like at tail end of last year, and now I'm kind of hooked. Like I have to read a thriller every month, at least one. So the thriller that I read in May that made it on this list, one of them that I read, was actually Last Seen Alive. This one really took me by surprise. I didn't expect to like it as much as I did. I thought I had figured out the twist, but every time I thought I'd figured out the twist, like there was another twist. There was a twist within a twist, and I love Claire Douglas for this. Like I think she's my favorite thriller writer. I haven't read too much of her. I've read like two of her books, but from what I've read, she just kind of blows everybody else out of the water, like for, you know, of the thriller writers that I've read. And yeah, I just really enjoyed this. This tells a story of a girl who basically has a lot of strange things start to happen to her. She's kind of trying to relight the spark in her marriage, but when her and her husband go away, like weird things start to happen. But it's not just weird things, they're things that are kind of like familiar to her, and they all kind of tie back into a trip she took when she was much younger to Thailand, that she took with a bunch of random strangers that she kind of like met on the train. And then her and this one girl had like a kind of a rivalry because of a reason, but they were like best friends, you know? So they end up taking off from the rest of the group, and something bad happens. The girl, our main character, comes back to her hometown. She never thinks about it again, and then the past kind of comes back to haunt her. And it was just a wild ride. So many twists and turns up until like the very last chapter. Things were still twisting and turning, and I cannot wait to read more of Claire Douglas's writing. And then in June, my favorite book that I read in June was actually The Right Move. And I did not expect to like this as much as I did. Like, I'm not like a sports romance girl, really. I'm not really a sports girl like in like my day-to-day life, and so like sports romance has never really appealed to me. But I tried this one out, and I tried Icebreaker out last year, and I'm like, maybe I am a sports romance girl, who knows. But this basically tells the story of Indy, and she has to move in with her best friend's brother, who they've had like a couple of interactions in the past, but they don't really know each other, and she really doesn't have another option, or she wouldn't do this, because the guy, like her they just don't click. They're like oil and water. She's very sunshine, he's very grumpy. But in this book, he's like an acts of service king, and I love acts of service. Like, I'm a sucker for acts of service in romance books. And he just kind of, the way that he did things for her and the way that he listened to her and the way that he spoke to her, I just like fell in love with it. I fell in love with their love story, and I just did not expect to like it as much as I did. It was so cute and sweet, and like Indy is like a book girly in the book, and so it was just so cute, like to see her talk about books and how she feels about books and why she loves to read. I don't know, I loved everything about it. I couldn't think of anything bad to say about it. It was just really good, and I would highly, highly, highly recommend it if you love romance books. And those are my top 6 books of the past 6 months.